He stepped onto the stage without a single sheet of paper in hand, needing no teleprompter. His eyes were as calm as a slow river, but underneath countless whirlpools stirred. Camera lights blinked on. Every lens pointed straight at his youthful face, cool, stern-shaped by a troubled time. No one suspected that in that very moment, history was about to turn, and his name would be carved permanently into the red dust of the Sahel. "I am the truth," he said first in French, then in English, and this time, you cannot mute the microphone. The room cracked open with uneasy silence. International journalists, silver-haired, well-suited, adjusted their earpieces, flipped open recorders. But no one was prepared for what was coming. Because he had not come to make a speech. He had come to reveal. In a modest apartment in Harlem, Mr. Malcolm, retired history professor from Atlanta, watched the screen, heart thumping slow and heavy. That face, that voice. The way he stared straight into the lens, it reminded him of 1968 of rallies, when black voices were declared threats to national order. The young man continued, his voice growing deeper, yet never losing clarity. "I am Ibrahim Traoré. You call me a coup leader, a dictator anti-Western. But I am none of these. I am truth." He spoke of his childhood, growing up in a world where Africa on television meant two colors only: the dusty red of scorched soil and the darkness of despair. Children with swollen bellies, flies on their eyes, guns firing in the background. That, he said, was the Africa you taught us to believe in. His voice shook not with fear, but with fury held tight beneath his ribs. Mr. Malcolm nodded slowly. His old eyes glistened. He remembered seeing those images for the first time on a store window TV in Detroit. At 18, he had felt something was wrong but lacked the words to resist. Now, almost 60 years later, a young man had the courage to speak what he had once only dreamed of saying. "We were ashamed of being African," Traoré confessed. "But we read, we learned. And we understood those images were scripted lies. Each clip, each headline, each phrase was a brick in the wall of our prison." The cameras kept still. Not a single journalist dared to interrupt. He needed no microphone now, for every heart listening had opened wide. "You never told the world about Rwanda's rise in technology, about Ethiopia planting millions of trees, about Botswana's democratic strength, Kenya's vibrant entrepreneur hubs. None of it made your headlines, because in your script, Africa is never allowed to win." Far away in a nursing home in Baltimore, Mrs. Elizabeth, the widow of a Korean War veteran, turned to her roommate and whispered, "That boy, he sounds like our Malcolm." But this time, no one can silence him. On screen, he took a half step forward. Small motion, huge weight, as though he were leaning into the very soul of the viewers. "You wrote our fate with words of fear. But I am not afraid, and none of us are afraid anymore." He paused. The hall fell silent again. Only the cold white light of a dozen cameras bore witness to the moment, a moment when a young man tore away a mask worn for centuries. "And this is how you wrote that script, line by line, headline by headline. I will only proceed with the next chapter once you confirm. If you own a mobile phone," he said, "then you're holding the blood of Africa in your hand." There was no accusation in his voice, just fact, raw and unpolished. Somewhere in the hills of West Virginia, in a dimly lit room decorated with worn family photos and the scent of lemon balm, Mr. Elroy turned up the volume on his old television. He had worked the coal mines in his youth, knew the smell of earth and sweat, of danger and dignity. But nothing prepared him for the quiet devastation he saw in the boy's eyes. Ibrahim Traoré stood beneath the glare of international lights, but his words came from the shadows. He didn't speak of theories. He spoke of graves, of minerals carved out with bare hands, of cobalt and gold and diamonds and the men who died to bring them to market. 70% of the world's cobalt is in the Congo, he said, and yet Congolese children can't afford the devices powered by it. The silence that followed was not empty. It was heavy. It pressed into the skin like heat in July. 30% of the world's gold flows from Mali, Burkina Faso, Ghana, Tanzania. But our mothers still line up for rice, still count coins for medicine, still bury sons who never knew a life without hunger. Mrs. Geraldine in New Orleans watched from her kitchen table, gripping her teacup. Her cousin had served in Ghana during the Peace Corps era. She remembered letters home about beauty, about poverty, about hope. But she had never heard someone from the soil speak like this before. 65% of the world's diamonds come from our lands: Botswana, Angola, Congo, Sierra Leone. Billions of dollars. But our miners live on less than $1 a day. His voice did not rise. It remained steady, like the beat of a drum before war. "And uranium?" he asked. "Niger powers Paris, but our villages go dark at sunset." The room of journalists remained frozen. Pens still, laptops still, faces still. "You ask why Africa is poor," Traore said softly. "The real question is, how has it been kept poor while being so rich?" Mr. Elroy leaned back in his chair. The question echoed in his mind. 50 years ago, they told him Appalachia was poor because it lacked industry. But the coal told a different story. Maybe the truth was always buried. In Africa, in Alabama, in the Bronx. Buried and denied. Colonialism didn't end, Traore continued. It changed shape. They no longer arrive with flags and armies. Now they come with contracts, with suits and briefcases. They no longer take by force, they extract by agreement. He listed them one by one. Glencore, a Swiss giant mining cobalt in Congo, 256 billion in revenue, 500 million in taxes. Less than 1%. Justice, he asked. Rio Tinto, a British-Australian conglomerate mining bauxite in Guinea. The land left poisoned, the air thick with cancer. Progress, he asked. Total Energies. French oil giant drilling in Angola, Nigeria, Congo. 36 billion in profit. No hospitals, no clean water, no roads. Investment, he asked. Anglo-American, once born in Africa, now hiding in London. Extracting diamonds and platinum. Leaving behind 6 million unemployed South Africans. Mr. Elroy's hands trembled. He reached for the Holy Bible on his desk, not to read it, but to feel its weight. He thought of Scripture. What does it profit a man to gain the whole world, but lose his soul? And what does it profit a company to strip the earth bare while mothers die in silence? They take, Traore said, and leave behind ghosts. But it was not only what was said. It was how he said it. Not with hatred, not with vengeance, but with a quiet dignity that made the silence scream. And this, he concluded, is not a system built on chance. It is designed, engineered, and protected by silence. Then, like a cold blade through cloth, he added, "But this exploitation wears a new face now. It smiles, it shakes hands, it signs deals that last 99 years. Colonialism did not die," he said. "It just changed its clothes." There was a tremor in the room, not from sound, but from recognition. Somewhere deep in the gut. Somewhere near the bones. At a quiet senior center in South Chicago, Miss Arlene paused her knitting. She had heard those words before, though not in this exact form. They echoed something Malcolm had said, something her father once whispered after returning from Liberia in the 1950s. And now, a young soldier from Burkina Faso said it aloud, on camera, before the world. "They no longer wear military boots," Traore said, "but they still march through our economies. They no longer carry whips, but they wield banks. They no longer build prisons, they give us credit lines." His voice was calm, the kind of calm that comes only after years of watching the world pretend not to see. He spoke of France first. 14 African countries still use the CFA franc currency printed in Paris, governed by the French Treasury. 50% of our national reserves sit in French accounts. They charge us interest to use our own money. Miss Arlene's fingers froze mid-stitch. "That's robbery," she whispered to herself. "Legalized robbery." Through this alone, Traore continued. France extracts $500 billion worth of resources from Africa every single year. Then he turned to Britain. They do not take from our lands, they take from our silence. He painted a picture not of red coats or flags, but of grey towers and tax havens. London is the capital of global money laundering. Jersey, Guernsey, the Cayman Islands, all under British rule. And every stolen dollar from Africa passes through them, somewhere in D.C. Mr. Reynard, former civil rights lawyer, tapped his cane twice on the floor. "Sounds like the Underground Railroad in reverse," he said. "This time they're taking the freedom out of Africa." Traore went on. "The United States comes not with chains but with bases. 46 military installations across Africa under AFRICOM. They say it's to fight terrorism, but their drones do not follow warlords. They follow presidents, ministers, journalists." The air felt heavier, even through a screen. "And China," he said. "China says win-win. But at what cost? They build roads from mines to ports. They offer loans with conditions buried deep. They lease our ports for 99 years. And in return, they take our lands, our future." He paused, not out of hesitation, but to let the truth breathe. This, he said, is how modern empires are built, not on conquest, but on contracts. Not by soldiers, but by suits. Then he asked a question so simple, it stunned. Who owns the headlines? He did not wait for an answer. The same companies that drill our oil buy your news. The same banks that fund our debts fund your newspapers. And your press, the one you call free, it is not free. It is bought. He listed the names. Jeff Bezos, who owns the Washington Post. Rupert Murdoch, with his media empire from Fox to the Times. Carlos Slim, Mexico's telecom tycoon, the largest shareholder of the New York Times. "And you still believe you're getting the truth?" he asked. He looked directly into the camera. "Who are your editors? Where did they go to school? Harvard, Oxford, Cambridge. Always the same. Always the same lens. Always the same blindness." Mr. Reynard closed his eyes. He thought of how, for decades, black stories in America had to pass through similar filters. How Martin was softened. How Malcolm was demonized. How truth was edited like a bad photograph. Traore's voice dropped. "How many of your journalists speak African languages, Swahili, Hausa, Yoruba?" The silence that followed was not just from those in the room. It was from every newsroom, every anchor desk, every editorial board who had chosen comfort over truth. Then came his final words. "This system has run for 100 years. It works because it hides in plain sight. It survives because it wears a suit, not a sword. And it thrives because no one dares to name it. They no longer use guns," he said. "They use pens, contracts, and offshore accounts. The words were sharp, but they were not shouted. They were dropped like stones into a still lake, rippling outward, forcing reflection. Somewhere in Jacksonville, in a living room lined with family Bibles and graduation portraits, Reverend Calvin exhaled a long breath. He had seen exploitation before, first in cotton fields, later in boardrooms. But this was a blueprint of theft perfected over generations. Ibrahim Traoré stood beneath the same lights, facing the same cameras, yet now his voice had changed. No longer just revelation, it was instruction. He was teaching the world how Africa was being looted in real time. "It begins," he said, "with corruption." He described how foreign corporations bribe African leaders. Quietly, consistently. They offer Swiss bank accounts, scholarships for their children, private jets, promises of exile in comfort if trouble comes. The image was familiar. To Reverend Calvin, it resembled the way black mayors in American cities were seduced, given just enough power to pacify their people, but never enough to change the system. Then come the contracts. Traoré continued. 50-year deals, 99-year leases, tax exemptions, no obligations for environmental protection, no minimum wages, no unions, Somewhere in Accra, a retired civil servant wept in front of his screen. He had signed one of those deals decades ago under pressure, under threat, under orders. Now he saw it played back like a confession. They take the land, the minerals, the rivers, but never build roads to our villages. Only from mine to port. They connect the earth to their ships, but not our children to schools. His voice darkened, but not with anger, with mourning. They control infrastructure, but only what serves their extraction. They take over ports, railways, airfields. They build pipelines, but not power lines. They light up their cities while our homes stay dark. Miss Loretta in Memphis clenched her rosary. Her brother had been a truck driver in Liberia transporting rubber and iron ore. He died with debts he did not create. She had never understood the system. Until now. And when our people protest, Traore asked, they bring in private security, foreign contractors, heavily armed. They declare protests terrorism. They jail our youth. They silence our radios. There was no pause for effect, only truth. One truth followed by another. They buy our journalists, or they intimidate them. Those who refuse are exiled or buried. He recited the steps with military precision. Step 1, corrupt the leadership. Step 2, sign the extraction contracts. Step 3, build infrastructure only for export. Step 4, secure it with guns and surveillance. Step 5, silence resistance with money, fear, or force. He looked into the lens again. This is how you build a system that steals from millions, but blames the poor for being poor. At that moment, Reverend Calvin rose from his chair. Slowly, deliberately, as if standing in a courtroom. This ain't just Africa, he whispered. This is America too. Because he recognized it the same logic that flooded black neighborhoods with liquor stores but not libraries. That paved highways through homes but left hospitals empty. The same silence around stolen wealth masked by talk of aid. And here's the cruel irony, Traore said, voice now, like iron under silk. They give Africa $4 billion in aid and write books about their generosity. But Africa loses $88 billion in stolen wealth every year. That's not a donation. That's a refund. The cameras were still, the room colder than before, and then he said it, the line that would circle the globe every day: gold, diamonds, cobalt, and oil leave our lands. And you call it charity. Not every leader sells their people, he said. Some still rise. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The weight was carried not by volume, but by memory. In a schoolroom in Montgomery, Alabama, now used as a community center, Mrs. Thelma stood near a faded poster of Martin Luther King Jr. and wept. She had taught history for 4 decades. She had told stories of Harriet, of Douglas, of Toussaint Louverture. But she never imagined she'd witness in her lifetime a young African leader speak with the same kind of fire and the same kind of danger. Ibrahim Traoré was not preaching. He was remembering, honoring. They called Sankara a dreamer, he said, until they silenced his voice. The room grew quiet, as if the ghosts of the past had drawn closer. Thomas Sankara refused luxury. He rode a bicycle. He cut his salary. He wore no imported suits. He banned ministers from driving Mercedes. He asked, "Why should we live like kings when our people sleep on dirt?" Mrs. Thelma nodded. She had taught about Sankara. She had made her students write essays about moral leadership. One of those students was now in Congress. She wondered if he was watching too. He changed Burkina Faso's name from Upper Volta, a name given by colonizers, to something our ancestors would recognize: the land of upright people. But Sankara didn't live long. They said he was too radical, too fast, too bold, so they killed him, and blamed the silence on stability. Traore paused. They do the same everywhere, he continued. To Lumumba in the Congo, to Cabral in Guinea-Bissau, to Nkrumah in Ghana. They praise you only when you're dead or when you kneel. He looked at the camera not with defiance, but with clarity. They call me dangerous, not because I have weapons, but because I have memory. In a church basement in Newark, Mr. Isaiah, an old deacon, whispered, "Amen." He remembered when the FBI called King a threat, when they bugged Malcolm's phone, when they told the world black men with dignity were too dangerous to be left alive. And now they call it dictatorship, Traore said, when a black man tells Europe to stop stealing. They call it tyranny when we demand our own currency. They call it rebellion when we ask for clean water, for land, for justice. He looked down for a moment, as if speaking to someone far beyond the room. "There are others now," he said softly, "young, clear-eyed, across Mali, Niger, Guinea, standing up, choosing the risk of dignity over the comfort of chains." The room shifted again. It was no longer about politics. It was about something older, something sacred. He told of a boy in Bamako who sold newspapers and taught himself 3 languages. Of a girl in Ouagadougou who fixed computers in a market stall. Of farmers resisting land grabs with songs older than colonization itself. They do not wear suits. They do not give speeches. But they are leaders. Back in Montgomery, Mrs. Thelma turned off the television, not because she was done listening, but because she needed silence to cry. One student years ago had asked her, "Do you think we'll ever see another leader like Malcolm?" She hadn't answered then. Now she would, because she had heard him. His name was Ibrahim. He was 34. And he wasn't just speaking. He was standing. And in that last moment of the broadcast, as his eyes met the camera, one final time, he said, "Freedom has no name. But it will be written in the blood of those who refuse to kneel. You cannot extinguish a flame," he said, "when it has taken root in the hearts of a continent." The words landed not like slogans, but like scripture spoken low and slow, as if addressed not to the world, but to the ancestors. In Ouagadougou, on a dusty morning lit by an orange sun, young people gathered, not for war, not for revenge, but for something deeper remembrance and resolve. They wore no uniforms, carried no weapons, just T-shirts with Sankara's face, just voices raw, unwavering. Thousands came to the youth festival, though they called it something else, the gathering of upright people. And in the crowd were elders who had lived through coups, famines, betrayals. They said nothing at first, they just watched and listened. Traore did not speak that day. He didn't need to. His words had already been planted. They were growing in drums and chants in the silent tears of women who had buried too many sons. Across the ocean in Detroit, Mrs. Clarice sat in her apartment radio playing softly. She hadn't been to Africa. But that morning she wore her kente scarf and lit a candle for her father, a Pullman porter who once said, "Don't let them tell you what freedom looks like. Define it for yourself." And now here it was, not finished, not triumphant, but breathing. Traore's voice echoed from the festival's loudspeakers, a recording scratchy but unbroken. "Our land has been robbed not just of gold and oil, but of its image, its story, its song." The crowd didn't cheer. They hummed, a low, trembling vibration that sounded like mourning or maybe beginning. He spoke of resistance that didn't come with guns, of teachers in rural schools rewriting textbooks, of market women refusing foreign brands, of teenagers hacking phones to bypass Western apps, of local radios returning to native languages. "We are not against the world," he said. "We are simply tired of being erased from it." A boy in the front row, barefoot, about 10, stood on tiptoes and shouted, "When I grow up, I want to be president." A few laughed, a few clapped. But then the oldest woman in the crowd, a midwife with silver braids, stood beside him and said, "You will be." But a president of people, not papers. Somewhere in Mississippi, Reverend Calvin heard the story on a local podcast. His hands, stiff with arthritis, pressed gently on the table. He whispered to no one, "That's the kingdom we prayed for." Back at the festival, an elder began to drum. Slowly, rhythmically. One beat, then two, then many. They weren't marching. They were remembering. Because this movement was not about governments, It was about something older than borders, something deeper than debt. Traoré's final recorded words came through the speakers. "This is not the end. It is only the day we opened our eyes." And then the screen went black. For a moment all was still. And then a drumbeat rose. No one could tell if it was a celebration or a warning. But it was alive, and it would not stop.